Hey, what is up, you guys? It is your girl, Dr. Kathleen Nash, and in this episode of The Wait is Over, we are going to take a deeper dive into non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We're going to talk about where we first learned about it, what its origins are. We're going to talk about how it affects your metabolic health and how it affects stubborn weight, especially stubborn weight around the middle. So let's go ahead and get into this.
The time is now. The place is here. The wait is over. Ladies and gentlemen, take your hands off that bagel and put them together for Dr. Kathleen Nash.
Now, in order for me to really give you information about fatty liver or non-alcoholic fatty liver, I do have to do a little bit of background on it. I know this part can be a little bit boring, but it really, really is important for you to get the full context of this problem and how it leads into issues like obesity and stubborn weight loss. So in a 2020 article by the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, researchers actually compiled information about the history of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, citing that fatty liver disease, whether it was coming from alcohol or not, was discussed and described as far back as the early 1800s. But it was actually in 1886 that a scientist known as Bartholomew reported that there could be a relationship between fatty liver and obesity. However, the actual term non-alcoholic fatty liver disease didn't occur until 1986, as researchers observed the progression of this type of fatty liver disease to something called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which the acronym is my last name, haha. NASH, by the way, was actually coined just 6 years earlier in 1980, when the majority of people suffering from the condition were routinely obese women, many of whom were also diabetic, and all of them were insisting that they didn't abuse alcohol. So as far back as the 1800s, researchers, scientists, and those in the medical community could clearly see that a primary causal factor of fatty liver disease was alcohol, which is a liquid derived from the fermentation of fruit and grain. Yet in the 21st century, the experts appear to be baffled by what causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, citing everything from genetic inheritance to side effects of medications, rapid weight loss, but nothing about the fact that grain and sugar is involved that they could see easily was the primary driver of traditional fatty liver disease. Now, I know this beginning part and the science and the background, I know that can be a little bit boring. I get it, but just bear with me here. I do have a point. So according to the Fatty Liver Foundation, alcoholism is one of the major causes of traditional fatty liver due to the production of toxic metabolites known as aldehydes, which occur when the liver is metabolizing alcohol. So when the liver is breaking alcohol down when liver is breaking alcohol down, right? Liver is the only organ that can break it down. One of the things that kicks off during that process is toxic, and it's known as an aldehyde. Right? Like formaldehyde, something that we use to preserve bodies after death, right? And this is because only the liver can metabolize alcohol. No other part of the body can do it. But did you know that there's actually another compound that only the liver can metabolize, which is fructose? So fructose is the component of sugar that makes it sweet. Now, if only there was a way to determine if fructose also produces a toxic metabolite when the liver broke it down, just like we found out with alcohol. But wait, that's actually happened too. In September of 2017, there was a study that was published in Gastroenterology where researchers restricted the fructose consumption in Latino and African American children who were in the obese category. They were clinically diagnosed with fat in the liver. They had at least one other metabolic issue like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, etc. And they had a habitual daily consumption of sugar, meaning they ate over 50 grams of sugar a day or just 12 teaspoons a day of sugar. Incidentally, when I was researching the background information for what I'm going to talk about today, the average American supposedly only gets about 77 grams of sugar, which is still way too high. But when just one 20-ounce bottle of Coke has 65 grams of sugar and a fruit smoothie from your local healthy juice store can easily have between 80 and 110 grams of sugar in it, I think that 77 grams a day thing is a little deflated, okay? But anyways, for these 9 days, the children had their meals provided to them, but instead of the 28% of their daily diet coming from sugar, it was dropped to 4%, and that was coming from fresh fruit, right? However, the drop in sugar would cause a net drop in calories of about 350 a day, which could result in weight loss. And the researchers in this study did not want the children to lose weight, as that would be a confounding variable. In other words, they wanted to see that if just the reduction of fructose alone would impact liver fat, independent of the children losing weight or not, right? They did not want to see weight loss as a reason, because then people could point to weight loss as the reason that their liver improved. So they replaced the 350 calories lost from kicking out sugar with starch instead. So the kids were still eating crap. It's just that the crap didn't have any sugar in it, but the calories they were eating on a daily basis remained the same. Now, on day 10, when they studied them again and did all of the tests again, every aspect of their metabolic health improved. So their blood pressure came down 4.3%. LDL, the bad cholesterol, dropped 12.5%. Fasting triglycerides, fat in the blood, came down a whopping 46%. Fasting insulin is the hormone that drives weight gain. It's also the main hormone involved in type 2 diabetes. That came down 53%. Again, with no change in scale weight. And in just a week and a half, in just 9 days. And while the kids didn't lose any scale weight, when they analyzed their fat depots, their visceral fat, or the dangerous organ fat, dropped 7%, and their liver fat dropped by a whopping 22%. This was amazing research, and at the time that I learned about it, which was maybe a year later, I thought that we'd see it everywhere, that this study would get into mainstream media, you'd hear about it. Nobody heard about it. Nobody heard about it. But it actually gets a little bit better, because in 2019, researchers took that same 9-day study further, and they evaluated the metabolic pathways of fructose in the liver and identified a toxic metabolite called methylglyoxal. So remember, earlier we said that there was the reason that we knew that alcohol drive regular fatty liver was because we identified a toxic metabolite called aldehydes, right? And then I said, well, what if we could find a toxic metabolite in non-alcoholic fatty liver? And sure enough, in 2019, they did, methylglyoxal. The paper actually uncovered that this metabolite was 250 times more reactive than glucose and 35 times more reactive than fructose in driving something called the Maillard reaction. So the Maillard reaction is the browning effect that you see on foods like bread and red meat, but in the body, the browning effect recapitulated things like type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, obesity, and other markers of metabolic syndrome. Whew! So, why did I go through all of that? Mainly to show you that just like there's clinical evidence that shows that alcohol is the primary driver of traditional fatty liver disease, there's also clinical evidence to show that fructose is the primary driver of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Yet despite this clinical evidence, sugar and or fructose is conveniently removed from the charts that I found on the internet about what drives this problem. And in the doctor's offices, the same generic routine is played out in most of them about what to do for fatty liver, typically being told to reduce your fats or to just try and lose weight, where with the information that I just told you, the excess body fat is independent of the damage to the liver. It's not that the excess body fat is driving the liver disease. It's that the body fat is associated with it. It's showing up at the same time. That's a really, really important lesson to learn. So now that we've gotten kind of the basic scientific information out of the way and the origins and all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about, in a more simplified format, how the liver can slow down or stop your body's ability to burn body fat for fuel, therefore sabotaging you when you're in a weight loss journey. Okay, so remember, you go to your doctor's office, they either tell you you have a fatty liver or you suspect you have a fatty liver. You ask them for help and guidance, and you're basically told you need to try to lose weight. That's usually what you're going to be told, okay? So the problem is, as of 2022, they suspect that fatty liver is found in about a quarter of the population globally, and in some parts of the world, it can be as high as half of the population. But what most people don't necessarily know is that the liver plays a key role in your body's ability to burn body fat or to manage a normal weight and stay there, because it's also the organ that converts your body fat into the fuel that you can burn as energy, right? So most people believe that if they were to go in a calorie deficit, if they're going to eat less and move more, that somehow their body just sort of magically taps into and burns the body fat directly. That's actually not true, okay? So what I want you to do is think of body fat, especially subcutaneous, under the skin, the stuff you see, right? Think of that as energy that the body has sort of wadded into a little ball and it's putting into a suitcase. In order for me to burn it, I have to open up the suitcase, I have to take out the wad, I have to unpack the wad back into an energy that I can burn, and now my body can use that fat for energy, right? It can't tap into it directly. And only the liver unpacks the wad, okay? No other organ does that. Your muscles don't do that. Only the liver does that, okay? But if your liver is fatty, right? If you have a fatty liver, then there's about 3 things going on here that is going to slow down or impede or sabotage the body and the liver's ability to burn that body fat. The first one, of course, is that fat is now being created inside the liver. This is one of the reasons we went through all that background information. Fat is being created in the liver. This is not fat that is getting trapped in the liver from some other part of your body. This is fat that is literally being created inside your liver, and it's not supposed to be there. So when this fat starts being created in the liver, it gets clogged up and it clogs it up, right? It makes it difficult for it to do things because it's got a compound in there that shouldn't be in there. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, because the liver is filling up with fat, it is also becoming inflamed, which means it is being set on fire, right? So just like if you have inflammation in your ankle, right? Like you have a sprained ankle, right? Inflammation is going to be a damaging effect. That's going to damage the liver. And so when an area becomes inflamed, it tends to do 2 things. It swells up and it turns red, right? So if we go back to that sprained ankle, if you sprain your ankle, the ankle swells up, the ankle turns red. And when you try to walk on that ankle or use the ankle in a normal way, you're not able to do that, right? It doesn't function as well. Same thing with the liver. Problem number 2. Problem number 3. Because the liver is filling up with fat that should not be there, and because the liver is inflamed, which is a destructive effect, so now the liver is swelling and turning red, the liver cells are actually becoming destroyed. And that's when we see elevated liver enzymes in the blood, right? So the liver cells are actually becoming destroyed, and the liver is going to try to repair that damaged parts of the liver by laying down something called scar tissue, which means the liver is turning hard. This is one of the reasons that fatty liver disease is a progressive disease, meaning it gets worse, right? It turns into steatohepatitis, and then it can turn into cirrhosis where the liver is completely hard. Now we're in an irreversible state, okay? So if I have a fatty liver, and it's also asymptomatic, meaning it doesn't give me any symptoms, I don't know if I have it, okay? So if I have a fatty liver, and I start eating less and moving more, I create this calorie deficit. I've got all this fat coming out of the fat cells, right, to be turned into fuel. But the liver, because it's filled with fat of its own, it's inflamed, it's swollen, its liver cells are being destroyed. The liver is going to do that conversion kind of like a clogged toilet, right? So I'm sure all of you have dealt with a clogged toilet before. If I have a clogged up toilet and I put more stuff in the bowl, well, first of all, I'm not going to get any extra water draining out of the other end of the pipe on that clogged toilet, and I'm also not going to fix the clog in the toilet by shoving more stuff in the bowl. And the same thing is true with a fatty liver. If I have a fatty liver and my recommendations are to release more fat from my fat cells, go on a diet, It doesn't mean that the liver is going to turn more fat into fuel, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to correct the fatty liver. And this is a big problem when we're being told or guided by people who are experts or who we feel are experts in these areas, telling us to do that very strategy to reverse it. The fact that people will see an improvement in their liver function when they lose weight has nothing to do with the weight loss, but the change in what they were eating during the weight loss, which we already identified are things like processed sugar, processed grain, right? The other thing that most people don't know about the liver is that the liver actually activates 60% of your thyroid hormone, right? So when the thyroid hormone comes out of your thyroid, it's known as T4. Well, T4 is not active. It does nothing. It needs to be turned on by other parts of the body. And 60% of that T4 hormone gets activated and turned into something called T3 by the liver. So it would also make sense that if I'm seeing thyroid dysfunction, I also want to look at my liver, especially if I'm obese, if I have other metabolic conditions like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, insulin resistance, right? And if I'm having difficulty losing weight. It could be that the thyroid itself is dysfunctioning, or it could be that the thyroid hormone is not being converted because my liver is in trouble. And because the doctors downplay it, people have a really hard time reversing this condition. And it is reversible up to a certain point, but if it passes a certain point, it is not reversible. And then one of the main reasons I think that the doctors are in this situation is because there's just no drug or medical treatment to fix a fatty liver. There's literally nothing that they can do. They have to wait for the liver to progress to a stage where we're either looking at liver transplant. Like, there's nothing that they can do, right? But what you can do if you're trying to lose weight, if you're seeing a swollen belly, if you suspect that you have fatty liver, is not only could you reduce calories and put your body in a calorie deficit, therefore releasing body fat from your fat cells, but also make sure to reduce the amount of sugar and processed simple carbohydrate you're eating so that you're not creating material inside the body that causes the browning effect, that causes the progression of metabolic syndrome, and also impairs the liver from doing one of its main functions, which is turning that fat into fuel. So in your own hands, by not just eating less and moving more, but by focusing on eating less of specific types of food that drive metabolic disease and obesity, can you take control back and help your body get to a more normal weight? Now, if you suspect that you have fatty liver, but you're not really sure if you do or not, again, it doesn't have any symptoms. You could do 2 physical assessments, and that could give you an idea on if you have it or not, right? So the 2 physical assessments that you could do is 1, find out what your body mass index is, right? If you have a BMI in the obese category, then that is a physical indication that you could be dealing with some stage of fatty liver disease. The other thing you would look at is your waist circumference. So if you are a woman and your belly is bigger than 35 inches, and if you're a man and your belly is bigger than 40 inches, then it is highly likely that you have at least some stage of fatty liver disease, right? The gold standard to detect it would be some kind of advanced imaging. You're not going to find it in a blood test. You're going to find it with things like ultrasound or an MRI or a CAT scan. But these days, if doctors deal with an obese patient who has one other metabolic marker like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, if they see elevated liver enzymes and a big belly, then they're probably going to suggest to you that you have some stage of fatty liver. But beware the healthcare professional that tells you that the way that you alleviate or correct the problem is by weight loss alone. This is a problem independent of weight and is driven by the type of food that you eat. So hopefully that made a lot of sense to you, gave you a lot of information on what kind of steps you can take today to help either reduce existence of fatty liver, reduce your risk of fatty liver, target belly fat, and help your body process and burn body fat better. Don't just focus on the simple reduction of calories. Focus on the reduction of fructose and processed carbohydrate as well. I am Dr. Kathleen Nash. It was a pleasure talking to you today in this episode of The Wait is Over, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye, butterflies.
Deep, deep down in my soul.